Hi guys, this is Creative Cuts, a channel where I build, paint and create things. In this video I'm going to do things slightly differently and essentially do two builds in one, jumping between the two but focusing on the thought process behind the decisions and the mistakes I make, hopefully allowing you to see that not everything always works out perfectly, but with some determination you can still build something that looks really cool. I had an idea to build a bunker of sorts. Some kind of missile silo, something I could use on the battlefield to create some interesting layouts. I had a few ideas and I sketched them out. I've built up a good stock of materials by now, but wanted to make something out of things you might have at home. I've loads of polystyrene at the moment, so I saw this as a perfect project to use some of it up. I found some plastic bowls at my local bargain store with some pretty interesting designs. Super cheap and easy to cut. Sometimes even just a simple bowl can provide the basis of a build. Turn it around and it could be an industrial generator. Endless possibilities. I built up the base with chunks of polystyrene held together with some PVA and cocktail sticks. Polystyrene is a great way of adding mass to a project because it is cheap and very lightweight. Whilst I was putting this together, I had an idea that it would be cool if my bunker could have a roof from which missiles or mega death rays or something could be launched. So I sketched up another idea and eventually decided on combining the two ideas and building two separate missile silos as an experiment. My roof needed some way of having giant blast doors that could open, and when I saw these cheap EVA foam mats at my local supermarket, I knew these would be perfect for the job. For the main structure of my bunker, I'm going to use a firm favourite of mine, in this case a plastic box of chocolates. Lots of cool little details inside and out. I used the lid to build a SciFi landing pad. You can see the link above and watch it if you like. I measured the centre of what will be my roof and used the box as a template. From this shape I measured equally on all sides to make the whole thing smaller with this proportion. I cut this out and noticed that the edges were not as clean as I'd hoped for, but I can deal with that later, so I won't worry about that now. Same as the plate build, I used polystyrene blocks to quickly add mass to the base. I cut out another template in paper and used this to cut 8 more reasonably equal shapes out of XPS foam. I wanted to add some panels and trim to break up the recognisable shape of the box of chocolates. So I cut loads of pieces of durable thick card and glued these together. I glued my concrete supports onto my bunker and used filler to fill in the gaps. This worked, but I want to find a nice way of hiding gaps that is really clean. Any ideas? Please feel free to chuck them in the comments below. I used more of this card to cut some hinge plates. And used a hair curler cut to size to represent the hinge. Okay, that's starting to take shape now. Back to my plastic bowl idea. I cut out the bottom of the bowl with a sharp blade. This plastic is pretty thin, so it cuts really easily. I made some fins out of card to use on my giant planet killer missile. I had a plastic tube about the right dimensions for this and attached my fins to my missile. Why I tried to stick this with PVA rather than my hot glue gun, I don't know, but sometimes logic escapes us all. Next, if you have a cat or other similar supervisory assistants to hand, then you can double check your measurements to make sure all work is to standard. Once satisfied, I scored this piece of card so it would bend easily into a circular shape. I cut out a donut shape from another piece of card and carefully fitted the scored tube shape into this and glued this all together. Once dry, I used this shape to cut out another circle for the base of my missile launch site. I had this plastic locking nut in my bits box, and it was the perfect size to house my missile, and it would help build the illusion that this missile continues underground. I glued this and my missile into place with some hot glue. I shaped the polystyrene bases on both models with a hot wire cutter, but a sharp knife would also do the same job. I started playing around with various bits and bobs, seeing what fits together, and more often than not, a solution will eventually present itself. This food container is something that most of us would throw out, but on closer inspection, some have really cool little details that you can use to your advantage. I harvested what I needed, and slowly I had a selection of parts that I could make a nice little power junction out of. I glued this all together and I'm pretty happy with the result. I had some spare electrical cable and cut these to length and inserted these into my newly built power thing. Here is where some of the problems start. One of my favourite products is called Sculptor Mold, a paper and plaster mix that can be used to fill large gaps and build up texture. Now, I tried to make some of this myself and it turned out great. However, in this mix I put far too little plaster in my mix, and it was basically wet paper. As you can imagine, it didn't go too well, but we'll come to that later. But once dry, I cut some garden mesh to size to use as a safety railing around my launch site. I also found these plastic screw caps at my local DIY store, and often use these as lights as they're about the right size and shape. I glued these to the perimeter of my bowl. After a quick prime with some spray paint, I began painting the base. And this is where the real problems begin. I wasn't really happy with the shape of it, but I just couldn't put my finger on it at the time. So I continued with a nagging feeling that something was wrong, hoping that a bit of paint would soon bring things together. Every project has a phase where things look like crap and you need to power through or reassess your choices in the hope that everything will look better eventually. I continued adding paint with the hope that I would find some inspiration, but something was still telling me that there was a problem. What made my decision for me was my girlfriend. That evening I showed her what I'd been building, and she laughed and said it looked like a giant elephant turd. And there it was, plain as anything to see. I shelved my projects and thought, oh well, you win some, you lose some. Fast forward 6 months, and after blowing away the dust and with fresh eyes and renewed vigour, I cut away the offending base and decided to give the whole idea another crack. This time using much more random shapes to break up my uniform shape that I'd previously created. It was a good opportunity to use up a bunch of offcuts that I'd collected over time. I had some real sculptor mould this time, and as always, this stuff works great. I love the texture created, and I'm always happy with the result. So I applied this to both models, so that it would at least have a degree of consistency between them. Now I've found that when working on bigger applications like this, it's better to mix up small amounts of sculptor mould, as the working time is somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes depending on how much water you add. But once it starts to cure, it hardens pretty fast, so small amounts will prevent unnecessary waste. Next, I gave everything a good hose down with some diluted PVA. This serves two purposes. Firstly, to begin to seal the polystyrene, allowing you to use spray paint on top of it, and also to provide a tacky layer onto which I sprinkle some small stones and general dirt. This is followed up by another layer of PVA to lock everything into place. And then, using some trusty Halford's primer, I gave everything a light coat. And suddenly I'm feeling inspired again, and it's all systems go. I spray some translucent brown through my airbrush in an uneven pattern around the rockwork to add a little colour variation. The more random, the better. Then I came in with a homemade wash, mixed up with some brown and black ink, some water, and a little dish soap. The dish soap helps break the surface tension of the water and allows it to flow more evenly into all the little gaps and cracks. And while this is still wet, I place a few drops of pure ink here and there, and because it's already going onto a wet surface, it immediately blends wonderfully. And then I come in with some black through an airbrush to darken some of the shadows. I paint in some details on my missile. And to add further detail, I returned to my sheets of decals from a fighter jet that I never built. These are great because they're full of little warning symbols and text, so I selected a few and carefully applied these to my missile. I added some blue to the lights and built up a couple of extra lights for my bunker, using a straw, and painted these blue too. So there we are. A build that ended up taking 6 months to complete. Sometimes not everything goes to plan. Sometimes we need to take a step back and reevaluate things. But most importantly, we need to find the will and determination to finish what we start. If you have liked what you've seen, you can let YouTube know by hitting the like button. You can support the channel by subscribing and staying up to date with all the latest videos, and possibly sharing this with a friend who you think might find it interesting. Thank you all for your amazing support, and enjoy.